Hello students, we are going to go over French absolutism today. In order to do this, I'm going to go through a couple of PowerPoint slides with you. And what we're doing here is building on this concept of absolutism we started previously. We looked at absolutism in Spain, and now we will look at France. This will take us probably 2 separate days to cover. Absolutism in France really comes to the height of its power, or the pinnacle, we'd argue, with really Louis XIV, which is the third monarch I have listed here on this page. And Louis XIV rules for an extraordinary amount of time. He gets to the crown when he's about 4 years old, though, so he doesn't really rule in his first 20 years or so, but he rules and lives, actually, an exceptionally long time, going to 1715. But in order to understand what Louis XIV, why he's so important, we have to look at the monarchs prior to Louis XIV. And so we're going to look at 2 particular individuals, Henry IV and Cardinal Richelieu. And that is where your France reading questions are going to come into play. So Henry IV, Cardinal Richelieu, and then Louis XIV. I also put here the Roman numerals for you, as kings are often called, and I put the Arabic number there to help you understand it. So Henry IV is really an interesting character in that he marries into the royal throne of France. Henry is actually a Protestant, and he will actually convert to being a Catholic, and I'm going to show you this. Converts to being a Catholic, and he has this famous quote about Paris being worth a mass. So what I'd like to always have you think about is, if you're a very religious person, would you convert your faith in order to get the crown? And this is what Henry IV does. So what happens here is we're coming off about 15 years of terrible fighting among the French people over religion, Protestants and Catholics. The Protestants, by the way, are called Huguenots there. So he was a Huguenot that marries into the royal family. The royal family is Catholic. And France will be a Catholic state. After about 15 years of fighting, moderates in the state, these politiques I wrote here, they would like Henry to take the crown because the fighting is so destructive for the state. Excuse me there. And so Henry IV does take the crown. And then about a decade into his rule passes some toleration for Protestants called the Edict of Nantes. Nantes is a city, edict is a declaration, giving them just a little bit of religious rights, not complete freedom. Okay, so we actually want to go back there to Henry IV. I'm sorry, this will be a little neater. He comes to power then after a series of nasty religious wars, and he is considered to be really one of the forerunners of French absolutism. And he does this by being really a nice ruler, and that at the bottom of the page here, he provides order and stability. Now the order, he's going to bring order to a state that was just devastated by these religious wars. And how does he build up this state? How does he build up the French state? Well, look at the things he does. He cuts expenses, and he creates new revenues. A revenue is a stream of income coming into the state. And these are things that we often see people running in their own country for different positions. They say the same thing. Cut how much we spend, bring in new sources of revenue. That's the goal of most leaders. So Henry IV, providing some order after this religious war is really important, and then cutting expenses, building in new revenues. That's going to allow business to work. The religious wars interrupted business and industry and trade, and that was really a problem. So in many ways, Henry's thought of as really providing so much order and stability after a terrible series of religious wars. So this is Henry IV. He also had a funny phrase I always like to share with students. And his phrase was he wanted a chicken in every pot. And so he wanted on Sunday, he wanted the average peasant. And 80 to 90% of the people are probably peasants at this point. Actually, let's go to 85 to 95% of the people are probably peasants. He wants them to have like meat once a week, a chicken every pot once a week. So you see him really working for the good of the French citizens. Now this picture is showing you some of the chaos and fighting among the French, and this is in the religious wars. We're not going to get too much more into these religious wars. But again, we've done Luther a short time ago. Even though Luther got his ability to practice his faith freely, the rest of Europe is going to be divided. Are they Catholic or are they Protestants? So again, here's a picture of Henry. He is willing to convert his faith, and I think he converts back and forth about 5 or 6 times in his life. And he does grant the Protestants some religious rights under him. Henry IV does. Now, after Henry IV, we get to a French leader. His name is Cardinal Richelieu. Technically, Louis XIII is the king on the throne. Richelieu ends up kind of heading the Council of State and he takes over. He's not quite a prime minister or president, but he's really the most forceful minister in the French state, and we say he runs the state. So Cardinal Richelieu, along with Henry IV, is going to help lay a foundation for absolutism. Richelieu does this by creating a position called an intendant, and that's a member of the bureaucracy. He puts these intendants in different positions around the state. He divides the states up into, I think, 38 different departments, and these intendants run the small area they're in charge of, and they report back to the king. Now, Richelieu's ruling for Louis XIII, but these intendants have the power of taxation. They're going to be the courts or judicial, the police, and they're watching the nobles. What he wants to do is make France the strongest nation in Europe, and he will do this as Cardinal Richelieu. Richelieu ruled very forcefully, and no one liked him, and he doesn't really care. Richelieu handpicks his successor as a guy named Cardinal Mazarin. And I should have really mentioned, too, they're both actually members of the Catholic Church here. So they're on this council of advisors to the king, and they continue to work to centralize the system of government and put power in the position of king, and they're ruling for the king. So these three rulers, really Henry IV, Cardinal Richelieu, then Cardinal Mazarin, are going to lay the foundation so that when Louis XIV gets the throne of the 4-year-old, it is the strongest, the most absolute monarchy in Europe. Very similar to what we'll see in Russia, but this is a really good example of absolutism.